Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwald. If you've ever looked into a starry night sky and wondered if there's intelligent life out there, today's program will be of interest to you. I'm joined by Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka, a professor and chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion at the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. And she's written a new book about technology, UFOs, and religion. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
My pleasure.
You've given a talk to our religious studies students about your upcoming book, and it was fascinating. And before we start the interview, I'd like just to show a short clip from that presentation, and then we'll talk about your research and your latest book.
Sounds great. So the book is called American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology, and there's a website you can go to where I do blog. That's an academic press, by the way, and this is kind of a racy topic for it's Oxford University Press, which is academic-y. And so a lot of things that I said in the book, they said, you can't say that. So I said, okay, that's fine, I'll just say it on my blog. So if you're interested in that stuff that's not in the book, it'll be on my blog, and that's at americancosmic.com. That said, there are two things that the book is about. The book is about my travels with scientists who believe that they engineer technologies from UFO artifacts, okay? And these are scientists that are from major research universities, like the top 5. If I told you which university, you would say, oh my goodness, right? It's one of the top 5 universities. It's also work with people from the American Space Program. These people are anonymous in my book. Okay, they have to be anonymous. This book was read by them, and certain information had to be removed.
Okay, so your new book, let me see if I get the title correct, American Cosmic, UFOs, Religion, and Technology. Mm-hmm. Or there's no and in there, Religion, Technology.
Yes.
It's scheduled out in less than a year. So it's scheduled for publication January 2019.
Correct, yes.
By Oxford.
Oxford, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So there must be a fascinating story behind this research. I know you're interested in religion and the extraordinary, but maybe you can just detail your path a little bit. What brought you to study UFOs and religion?
Sure. Well, for one thing, people actually don't really think about the connection between extraterrestrials and religion. And I think that if you look at the history of religions, among other things, religion is a perceived contact between non-human intelligence and humans. And then a lot of times religions, form out of these contacts. So what got me interested in the topic of UFOs was I was finishing a book, ironically, on Catholic culture about purgatory. Huh. And as I did this research, and this research went from about 1200 up through the 1800s. And I did a lot of research in archives. And what I found, among other things, anecdotes about purgatory, I found a lot of extraordinary phenomena, and it was aerial phenomena. And people would talk about comets that were conscious, beings of light, and these kinds of things. And I honestly, the thought of UFOs never occurred to me, of course. And I thought, oh, well, I don't know what these are. I won't include them in my book, but I kept a catalog. Well, the catalog kept growing and growing and growing. So, I had reports of flames coming through walls and upsetting nuns in their cells in convents, and the Mother Superior wanting to get rid of the flame. How do we do this? Well, it must be a soul from purgatory, and it doesn't actually know that it needs to go to purgatory, so let's pray for it. And this is the type of interpretation that these things were given back in that era. And so I kept this catalog, and I actually showed it to a friend who was a non-academic friend. And I said, what do you think about all of this strange stuff? And he looked it over, and he said, it looks like a Steven Spielberg movie, frankly. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, these look like UFO reports. And I thought, well, that sure is strange. I actually said, that's ridiculous, right? And
so your friend turned you on to the idea that
yes.
These kind of mystical medieval phenomena corresponded in some ways to extraterrestrial sightings.
Things that we see today.
Right.
So, we still see things in the sky. We still see aerial phenomena. Some people have experiences like UFO sightings. There's close encounters of the third kind, which is supposed to be, occupants of these supposed craft. And so I did actually start to think about the connections there. And I actually wrote some articles about how can we look at modern day UFO reports and compare them to historical reports, not in any way that that is irresponsible, like saying that they're the same, but trying to understand the frameworks that we use to interpret these things. Well, that was just the most non-controversial part of my study. So, I met people who were called experiencers, people who actually have these experiences.
So are these what we call close encounters?
Yes,
these are experiencers?
Yes.
Not necessarily abductees. Or
Well,
maybe some of them are?
They could be, yeah.
Okay,
They
okay.
don't. The term abductee implies that that this is a very negative experience, which in some cases it is for these people. Like the nun who reported the flame, she did not enjoy the flame coming through her cell at night. So there are negative experiences, but experiencers is the term most used to refer to people who've had experiences.
So I have to get my language
That's
right.
okay,
Right?
yeah.
So we're going to get rid of abductees, and we're going to
Yeah.
talk. But so the some of these experiences that that you've described so far sound almost like a mystical religious experience. Is
That's
that
what I
kind of-
found,
That's what
yeah.
you found. So experiencers who have some sort of encounter with
Yes.
extraterrestrial beings or sightings or whatever. Describe these encounters almost as if they were a mystical religious experience, taking them out of their consciousness or out of their body. Am I
Yes.
close?
You're very close.
Okay.
So levitation is something that is often talked about in these experiences. This is something I know a lot about, being a scholar of Catholic history, levitating saints and so forth. So there were patterns that were so similar that I decided to do this. What I wasn't bargaining for was to find that there were scientists who were actually very interested in the topic as well. And so
This is not just fringe science. This is
No.
You're talking about respected,
Yes.
recognized scientists and technologists who are
Yeah.
interested. Okay.
So once I found this out, I thought that this was a story that hadn't been told. And so I decided to actually, a scientist came to ask me. I didn't search them out. They actually found me. And I was invited to go to an alleged UFO crash site in New Mexico.
Is this Roswell?
It is not Roswell.
It's not Roswell.
Yeah.
There's another one, huh?
There are 8.
Okay.
Yeah, there are 8.
But Roswell's the most famous.
It is.
Or infamous, I guess.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
infamous, I think, is a good word for
Okay,
it. Yeah.
all right.
So this was a person who is very legitimate. So this is a person who has, has been an engineer. He's affiliated with the space program, and he's worked with the space program his whole life. He is a scientist, and he also creates biotechnologies that are inspired by what he believes to be artifacts from the crash sites. So
this is part of the Roswell mythology, I guess.
It is.
You
It's
call it
absolutely,
mythology that
yeah.
we have recovered alien technology from crash sites
Yes.
and then reverse engineered the technology
yes.
to produce some technological advances.
Exactly,
Okay.
yes.
All right.
So you have to understand how odd this was for me. So I'm a professor of religion, and you are too. So you know that when we study religion, we never study it with the framework of, we study it from an agnostic framework usually, right?
Right,
So,
right.
okay, so here I am confronted with people who are legitimate scientists and legitimate people, right, who want to take me to this site to look at these artifacts. Now, at first I did not want to go. I thought, this is too weird. This is way too far out from my framework.
Too conspiratorial.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And it's like a mythology, and here I was just about to enter a mythology, is what I thought. And of course I did. So I asked a friend of mine who I knew was interested in this topic, and he works at a top 5 research university, and he's an endowed chair of molecular biology. And he's fascinated with the topic. And so I asked him to go with me. I said, I'm not going to go to this place with this person by myself. Will you go? And he jumped at the opportunity. And so we were taken to this place blindfolded, okay? And we couldn't know where it was. And
It just gets better and better.
it does. It's quite unbelievable. And we go out there, and I explained to them, I'm a professor of religious studies. I can't go to to the conclusion that I can't arrive at the same conclusion that you arrive at, which is that these are real artifacts from alleged craft. I can't, because I don't know that that's true. I don't believe it. But I do want to go because I want to study your belief. And they said, sure, So we all went out there. my friend and I were blindfolded. We got out there, and in fact, we saw the parts and that kind of thing. Brought them back. My friend had analyzed them, and said they were truly anomalous. That he didn't know what they were or where they came from. Okay, so that's part of the strange story of my book,
Right.
is that the people who believe and that experience these things aren't fringe. They're not on the margins. And in fact, I hadn't met so many wealthy people in my life until I did this study.
And these folks are really coming to. I'm trying to get my mind around this too.
It is, yeah.
They're coming to a type what we would call as religious scholars a mythology
Yes.
through technology.
Yes,
Right,
it's
because the
fascinating.
technology is
Yeah.
leading them there.
Yes.
Now, but when you think about the history of religions,
Mm-hmm.
and we read sacred text, and we read about angels, and we read about sky gods, and we read about beings from the heavens, it's not such a far-fetched idea that,
No.
that we continue to look to the skies and we see anomalous events,
Yes.
and then we make certain interpretations about them.
Right.
So this is not just a 20th century phenomenon, but the technology part has changed the way we tend to look at these
That's
events.
yes, that's an excellent point, and that's exactly the point that I make in my book. Is that technology changes this story, right? So in the past, when we look at miraculous events, say Jesus' miracles, for example. Now Jesus was a historical figure, right? So in many ways, that lends some credibility to perhaps he did something like this, but we can't prove whether or not these things happened, that the miraculous. So the scientific framework can't prove that. Many Christians on faith take this to be the case.
Okay.
However, in the present day, and this is how UFO belief is different than historical religious belief. Today we have the means to assess these artifacts, right? We also have reports from people, pilots, trained observers, people who know what they're looking at when they're up in the sky. I've talked to many pilots and people affiliated with the military. So we have these reports, right? We also have radar. The New York Times article in December of 2000, what was it? It was only a few months ago, so it was 2017. Talks about this as well.
I remember, yes.
Yeah. So so here we have something that's completely different. We're also, as children, we have been exposed to Star Trek, Star Wars, right? So galactic visitors,
Sure.
Stellar civilizations. This is nothing that's we can get this, right? So we can understand these kinds of things through the frameworks that we've been exposed to as kids. So this is exactly the framework now that we would use to try to understand things that to us are now unexplainable or even somewhat unbelievable.
Yeah, so now you raise another specter. We not only have been fascinated by the idea of extraterrestrial life coming to our world, but we're also fascinated by the idea of going elsewhere.
We really
going
are.
to the heavens.
Yes. We're prepared. We have the Mars mission.
Yeah.
We want to go. So we're explorers.
Now, and you mentioned something in the preface of your book about a Hindu belief of traveling through space.
Yes.
And not a physical traveling, but a kind of mind-body ability to travel great distances. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because
Yes.
this is kind of an ancient religious belief.
It
right?
really is. Okay, so this idea that we can travel to other planets and we can, go through the heavens is actually something that you find in historical religions. So within Hinduism, we have people who are through practices like yoga practices are able to leave their bodies and travel through the solar systems and see planets and maybe meet non-human intelligent beings. And we have this also in the Christian tradition. So you have Emanuel Swedenborg, right, who had astral travels as well. And in fact, I think it was around 1750 or the 1750s, he wrote a best-selling book called Life on Other Planets. And this is 1750, and this was a bestseller in
People
Europe.
are still reading this.
They
right?
are, yeah.
Still being read.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, I know when I was probably a teenager, I read a book by Eric Van Daniken
Oh, yes.
chariots of the gods.
That's right.
So his thesis is a little bit different, I think, and it's been critiqued and maybe debunked over the years. But from an archaeological perspective, he did amass evidence from around the world that suggests that aliens are not only visiting our planet now, but have visited in the remote past.
Right.
And that that's part of where some of our religions come from, these encounters in the past.
Right.
Is that part of the current technology or religion of technology that you're seeing here, or is this an entirely different kind of mythology that has developed?
Okay, so I actually do talk about this in the book, and
Okay.
yeah. So this is called what I call the ancient aliens effect.
Yes.
Okay, so what it is basically that now that we've been so inundated with belief in life on other planets and non-human intelligence and that type of thing, through Star Wars, Star Trek, and also, the chief scientist of NASA has recently said, we know life is out there, we're going to, find it within 10 years. She's not talking about, of course, little green men type.
Maybe
life.
looking at single cell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the public, if you look at the public reception of what she said, that it doesn't reflect that they are thinking microbes.
Right.
They're thinking little green men kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so that said, there is this widespread reinterpretation of our past. And I actually call it by two terms. There's the ancient aliens effect, and this is, you can see it in your students. If your students go to the Vatican and they see, say, a painting of Saint Francis of Assisi, one of the saints who received the stigmata in a most unusual way by looking like some type of aerial phenomena coming down and zapping his hands, right? And then he receives the stigmata. Right. Well, my students go there and they send me, they know I'm interested in this topic, they send me the picture and they say, look, Dr. Pasulka, here is this Catholic man, looking at a UFO. So they interpret these paintings and these traditions through the lens of the UFO. Right. Okay, so they see these pictures and they say, oh, that has to be a UFO. There's also one other way that this interpretation gets played out, and I'll give you an example. An experiencer in North Carolina, a well-known experiencer, pilot, had an experience, close encounter experience, and he was a Baptist. And what happened to him was that first he was quite confused by it, but then what happened was he reinterpreted his whole Christian tradition through the lens of the reality of the UFOs. And he said, well, all those references in the Bible that refer to God in the clouds or Jesus coming back in the clouds, what that means is, Ezekiel's wheel, this is all about UFOs. And I call this the biblical UFO hermeneutic, right. Which is basically that they're looking at, they're reinterpreting their own religious tradition through the lens of the UFO. And this,
like your students are reinterpreting their art appreciation.
Exactly. Right. So Daniken began this tradition really, when he didn't actually begin it. There were, after Kenneth Arnold's sighting of what he called flying saucers in the late 1940s, 1947, seems to be a key year here for this mythology, right? Yeah. So he reinterprets, well, he basically says, I see these things, and then a lot of people who are religious begin to think this is the end times. And they start to look at it from the framework of their tradition and their religion. So
do you have a chapter on the apocalypse in your book? Is there a kind of alien apocalyptic thinking here?
There is an alien apocalyptic thinking, but I don't actually talk about that. I talk about enough right. without having to talk about that. But there could be another book written about that.
Well, I know the late Stephen Hawking talked about whether or not we actually wanted aliens to visit our planet, because they may come not with good tidings, but rather harmful intent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's another kind of take on the whole sky gods from above coming down.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned, I was struck by an interesting statistic. You said that over 50% of adults in America believe in intelligent life.
Yes.
Extraterrestrial.
Non-human intelligent life.
Non-human intelligent life. And something like 3/4 of young people, millennials, I guess. And you point out that these numbers are approaching the numbers of people who believe in God.
Yes.
So how is, here we're talking about essentially faith. You mentioned that word earlier. Faith in something that, most people aren't experiencers.
No.
Right, so they haven't seen or encountered any kind of alien presence. So you're really talking about faith in a sense here. Does it compare to religious faith in any way? Are there interesting similarities?
Absolutely, there are interesting similarities. Like I said, if a religious person encounters something like this, it at first challenges their traditional faith, but then they go through a process of reinterpretation and they incorporate the UFO belief within their own tradition. So there's that. A lot of people just have, there are different forms of belief in non-human intelligent life. So some people just think that someday we'll find it. Some people think that it's here. Some people think that it was here in our past. Okay, so when that statistic is an overarching statistic that gathers up all of these different ways of believing in non-human intelligent life. And my idea here is that it's not like traditional religions in the sense that there's a realist effect here, right?
Right.
So you've got reports coming out all the time right now about what pilots see, what the military sees in the sky and that kind of thing. And, the whole conspiracy about that, the government, keeping it, the X-Files narrative.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? The government saying that it doesn't exist. And now people from the government coming out and saying, no, we know it exists. We just don't know what it is. And so this changes it from a historical religion where the historical religion a lot of times is based on a faith, right? Now you have this realist impetus. And you know what? To tell you the truth, I haven't actually quite figured that part out yet. So I leave it at that in my book and I say, well, here we have this artifact and here we have some incredibly sophisticated, legitimate scientists looking at it and saying it's anomalous. I don't know what it is. And I leave it there.
Well, it's almost like we're in the middle of an emerging religion.
Yes, I think that's it.
Because, if we're looking at historical religions, if we could transport ourselves back in time and we were in the middle of what we call historical, then it would be, in the same sense, we would feel something was emerging, something was coming about. It wouldn't be historical at all, but we'd be part of it. So it would have those kinds of realist expectations attached to it.
It's absolutely the case. So I open with a quote by Carl Jung that says, he wrote one book about flying saucers.
Right.
And in that book, he said, here we have a golden opportunity to see the beginning of a legend and a myth.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an incredible quote. And you do mention Jung.
Yes.
And you mentioned some other heavyweight thinkers and philosophers.
Yes.
You want to maybe drop a few names?
Sure. Okay, so I also talk about Heidegger. Heidegger
Right.
somewhat frames the book. I don't really go into Heidegger too much. Martin Heidegger is a philosopher
Right.
who, he was a philosopher who, in many senses, is what I would call misunderstood. He's, and somewhat maligned by the philosophical community for good reason. His language is hard to understand. Okay, but he's writing in the 1930s and 40s, and he's talking about technology right before the internet comes along, and so he has some really key essays that help me understand this almost mystical tradition of technology. And one of the essays is called "What is Technology?" Okay, and he asks questions. He's very Socratic, and he says, "What is technology?" And he's also he's a very well trained philosopher, going back to the ancient Greek philosophers and basically showing, well, this is what technology has been. And he's saying we are now here at a new era, and the danger is to understand technology as instrumental, as something we pick up and we use. But that is not at all what technology is. And he actually suggests that technology, and in fact, a lot of people now follow Heidegger, knowingly or not, by suggesting that we actually co-evolve with technology, right? Wow. So technology actually inhabits our bodies in ways that are so imperceptible that we don't even think about them, we don't even understand.
Right. And our minds.
Yes, our minds, absolutely.
So it provides a new framework for being.
It really
new
does.
Ontological framework.
It does.
This is so fascinating. I'd like to invite you back for another program. Would you be willing to come back and we'll continue to talk about this? And maybe I would like to go back and pick up your work on medieval Catholicism as well.
Would love that.
All right.
I would love that.
Well, thank you, Diana. This has been fascinating.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us today on Religion and Life here at Abt TV. Please join us next week when Diana returns to talk about medieval Catholicism, the doctrine of purgatory, and how all of this comes about through an interaction with popular culture and religion. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.